I want to welcome everyone to tonight's program. I see some familiar faces. I see new faces. And I see some faces shrouded in the mask, so I don't know if you're new or familiar. But we are all welcome to Revolution Books. And we're very excited to have Rafael Kadaris here tonight to talk about woke lunacy versus real revolution. My name is Raymond Lotta. I am a spokesperson for Revolution Books. I am a political economist, and I am an advocate for the new communism brought forward by the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian. And, this woke identity politics and cancel culture, pose as and purport, to be challenging the injustices of the system. But in fact, they reflect and reinforce the thinking and the ways of acting of this system, thinking and acting on the terms of this system. And that's what we're going to get into tonight and open up in this discussion following Rafael's talk. And it's entirely fitting that we have this conversation here tonight at Revolution Books, which is the political, intellectual, and cultural center of a movement for an actual revolution. And this is where people get into, and we get into together, why the world is the horror that it is, and why it is that only revolution can address and solve the accursed problems that humanity is facing. And here you discover the work and leadership of the most important political thinker and leader in the world today, and that is Bob Avakian, who has brought forward the new communism, which is a radically new framework for human emancipation. And if you want to know what all the buzz is about, go look at these interviews, the Bob Avakian interviews. There's a palm card. If it's not on your chair, you will receive it during the course of discussion, and on the way out, you can see him in an incredible interview. This is on video, online, and you get to know him as a thinker, as a person, as an incredible figure who is taking responsibility for leading the revolution in this country, the belly of the beast. A revolution to emancipate all of humanity. And this is a total revolution to put an end to all oppression and exploitation. And it's a revolution that values beauty, the imagination. And that's why here at Revolution Books we like to say that this is a place where the search for the truth and critical thinking meet the poetic spirit. And this is a place where we open up debate about the biggest questions confronting humanity, about issues of history, about contemporary world politics. And in these discussions and debates, we suss out and sort out what will contribute to the emancipation of humanity. What contributions that people are making, what trends of thought, what ideas that are out there, what contributions people may be making can contribute to the emancipation of humanity. And what are those things, the ideas and the notions and the doctrines that actually are obstacles to the emancipation of humanity? And that brings me to our guest speaker and our topic, which is woke lunacy versus real revolution. And Rafael Kadaris is a member of the National Get Organized for an Actual Revolution tour. He is a correspondent for the Revolution Nothing Less show, the YouTube show that people can watch. And he is part of this initiative Woke Lunacy versus Real Revolution, which is storming the citadels of academia, because he and Sunsara Taylor, who has been leading this initiative, are on the hustings, and they're breaking and cracking this debate open because, as I said, there are some things that contribute to the emancipation of humanity, and there are other things that are great obstacles. So with that as our opening, we're going to bring Rafi to the stage, and he's going to give, he gave me a little heads up. He's going to give us a very substantive talk, which is why you came. Okay, he's going to give us a very substantive talk. And I know there are people in this room and outside it who feel very passionately about these questions. And I would ask that you keep your belts buckled for during the conversation, during the presentation, and then we'll have time for you, the audience, to raise your questions, your concerns, your disagreements, your agreements, and we're going to take it from there. And I want to emphasize one other thing, and that is, not only are you going to hear about this, but you will also, from Rafi and from me as we go through this, also hear about ways that you can get involved in this great campaign to crack this debate open among artists, among academics, and in society more broadly. So again, I welcome you here, and I welcome to the podium Rafi Kadaris.
All right, that was a great introduction, Raymond. So, my mic is okay? Sounds good? All right. So today I'm going to challenge you to do something with your life that can make a huge difference for people here and all over the world. First, we'll take a look at the big picture, the fundamental problem and the real solution. Then, we'll get into how the framework of woke identity politics not only doesn't measure up to this, it is actually worsening the terrible situation that we face at a moment when we have a shot to fight for something truly emancipating. We are living in unprecedented times. From Arizona to Italy, Mexico to East Asia, this has been the hottest summer on record. July was almost certainly the hottest month in 120,000 years. Yes, you heard that right, 120,000 years. Oceans are steaming, coral reefs are dying, the beautiful city of Lahaina on Maui is in ashes because of ferocious firestorms fueled by climate change. Canada is still burning. Whole sections of the planet are becoming unlivable. Obviously, the science-denying fascist Republicans just want to pour more gas on the fire. But what about Biden, the so-called climate leader? He is opening up more drilling of the very fossil fuels that are killing our planet. And the more the Arctic ice melts, the more these capitalist vultures see new opportunities to drill even more. The U.S. imperialists have been threatening China. They're waging a bloody proxy war with Russia, using Ukrainians as cannon fodder. All this is pushing things dangerously close to direct war with these rival imperialists. In other words, World War III and potentially nuclear war. Meanwhile, the rich imperialist countries like Europe and the United States, which have done so much to plunder and destroy the rest of the world, are slamming the door shut on desperate migrants and turning their borders into graveyards. Biden continues Trump's immigration policy, while Republican fascists in Texas step up their sadistic cruelty by installing flesh-tearing razor wire in the Rio Grande River. The fascists, who now control the Republican Party and the Supreme Court and the unthinking obedience of millions of MAGA foot soldiers, are ripping away long-standing fundamental rights like abortion and affirmative action, They're banning books, banning African American studies, literally teaching children that slavery was beneficial in some ways because it gave people job training. Yes, this is now part of the official school curriculum in Florida. They're legalizing discrimination against LGBT people in the name of religious freedom. They're aiming to eradicate trans people from public life, if not from life itself. And now that Trump has been indicted on multiple serious charges, they have already declared the upcoming election to be illegitimate if Trump loses, and are threatening civil war if they don't get their way. And let's not forget that Trump wanted to call out the military to shoot protesters for standing up against the police murder of George Floyd. And this time around, he has people and plans lined up to do that kind of thing, and much worse. Trump has promised retribution and drawn up enemies lists. His MAGA base is more armed and ready to carry out violence than ever. All this in the service of an outright fascist program of even more open and aggressive white supremacy, violent subjugation of women and LGBT people, genocidal xenophobia, and bloodthirsty America First domination, unconstrained by the laws and norms as we've known them. The Democrats have no real answer to any of this besides trying to hold on to the norms of this system which created this whole mess in the first place. This system has a name: capitalism imperialism. Capitalism is an economic and political system of exploitation and oppression. And imperialism refers to the worldwide nature of this system. This system has rules and dynamics. Under capitalism, things are not produced to meet the needs of humanity. They're produced as commodities to be sold for a profit. The means of production, the factories, farms, raw materials, and technology are privately owned by capitalists. These capitalists are locked in competition, and if they don't exploit their workers more and more ruthlessly, or cut costs by treating the environment like a dumping ground, some other capitalist will, and they'll be driven under. It's cutthroat. Whole countries are locked in this kind of competition. Nuclear-armed imperialist gangsters like the U.S., Russia, China, and others competing over markets, raw materials, trade routes, and world domination. This system leads to war. It destroys the environment. It has created unbearable conditions in huge parts of Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, where 350 million children have died of starvation and preventable disease just since World War II. This system has white supremacy and male supremacy built into it, and a U.S. Constitution written by a bunch of slave owners and capitalists, which treated black people and women as nothing more than property, and which is still used to legalize injustice and oppression. This system can't be reformed into anything good, can't be made better with a few more diverse faces at the top of it. It needs to be overthrown, defeated, dismantled, abolished, and replaced by a socialist system based on the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, written by Bob Avakian, with a radically different economy and political system that backs people up in overcoming all forms of exploitation and oppression based on class, race, sex, and gender. This revolution is more urgently needed and more possible than it's ever been. This system is in profound crisis and more divided than it's been since the Civil War in the 1860s. This is a moment of rapid change when what seemed impossible yesterday can become possible today, including major advances toward revolution or even a revolutionary seizure of power if the revolutionary forces are out among the people now, shining a light on the deeper reality of what's happening and why, and bringing out that there is an alternative to living this way. And that means connecting them up with the leadership we have in Bob Avakian. B.A., Bob Avakian, is completely different from all these bourgeois politicians and petty bourgeois misleaders who just want to maintain the system in one form or another. He is a revolutionary who has forged a whole new framework for human emancipation, a new communism. Someone who has analyzed this crucial turning point in history and developed the roadmap for how to seize on it and bring a better world into being. A key part of that roadmap is ferocious struggle against all the bullshit ways of thinking that are standing in the way of the people who need this revolution, taking it up and fighting for it now when it counts the most. And right now, one of the biggest roadblocks, especially for young people who need to be a key part of this revolution, is woke identity politics. Think about everything I described about the moment we're living in. College campuses should be hotbeds of resistance and revolution. Students should be looking at the big picture, seeking out and debating root causes and real solutions. Instead, wokeness is shutting down questioning, lowering people's sights, and misdirecting their outrage in destructive ways, furthering the nightmare we face. Let me get some water, 1 second. A narcissistic obsession with self and identity. A focus on changing words rather than changing the world. And hiding from reality with safe spaces and trigger warnings. A cannibalistic cancel culture backed up by identity politics police dictating who has a right to speak and make art. And if you haven't experienced something directly, you should just shut up and stay in your lane, check your privilege. All aimed at getting a seat at the table in this blood-soaked American empire. Now, woke started as a word in the black vernacular basically just meaning awareness or awareness of injustice. But it has mutated into something completely different, something toxic. When I talk about wokeism, I'm talking about an anti-scientific philosophy that believes there is no objective reality and that each identity group has their own reality and can only know their own direct experience. I'm talking about an anti-revolutionary politics that identifies the problem as people with a little more privilege, white people, cisgender people, men, etc., rather than the capitalist imperialist system in its ruling class. And it sees the solution as inclusion within this murderous and parasitic system. I'm talking about an ends justify the means morality, with a vicious mob mentality, as our 7-point indictment on woke as a destructive force over here says. A bloodlust to target and tear into individuals while cowardly ducking and often obstructing the fight against the system, and especially its overthrow through an actual revolution. I'm talking about a capitalist ideology where oppression becomes something to be owned rather than to be ended. And identity gets turned into capital and used as leverage to gain position over others. Now, I'll get into all this more fully as we go on. But the reason that this wokeness is so dangerous is because it poses as being against racism and gender oppression, while actually reinforcing the system that is the source of this oppression. It poses as being on the side of the marginalized, while actually ignoring the plight of the masses of oppressed humanity. It poses as standing up against oppressive power, while actually targeting and intimidating everyday people who care about injustice, and letting those with real power and the system itself off the hook. And the more that this puny and pathetic pose clashes with reality, the more loony and destructive it becomes. Just a couple examples. You guys have heard about the Webb Space Telescope, right? Yeah. Some of you guys? It's been capturing incredible images of distant stars and galaxies. I wish I had brought some images as props. Incredible images of stars and galaxies, and can peer back in time, think about 13 billion light years, almost to the Big Bang. But have you heard that the person the telescope is named after, James Webb, was a vicious homophobe who purged gay employees from the State Department in the 1950s? Have any of you guys heard this? This accusation was spread and repeated all over the internet. There's just one problem. It's not true. When Hakeem Oluseyi, the president of the National Society of Black Physicists, researched these claims and showed definitively that the quotes and actions attributed to James Webb were actually from other people, that should have been the end of it, right? No. The wokesters doubled down and moved the goalposts, now insisting that Webb should be canceled for not proactively speaking out in support of gay employees. And then, it gets worse, they went on the attack against Hakeem for even daring to investigate this, slandering his character and claiming he had no right as a straight person to speak on it. They even wrote a snarky article called, "The Straights Are Here to Save Us," as if the facts he was unearthing somehow depend on whether you're gay or straight. But pull the lens back and think about the vast and beautiful universe this telescope reveals, the awe and wonder of scientific discovery versus the narrow, vengeful, and petty preoccupations of the woke mob, even in the face of evidence disproving their claims. Another example, a few years back, I was on the UC Berkeley campus organizing students for a big protest against police terror. I was holding up this poster with just some of the many thousands of names and faces of black people, Latinos, and Native Americans who've been brutally murdered by police in recent years. But rather than joining and calling on students to confront and act to stop this atrocity, one student from the Black Student Union came up to me and told me to put the sign away, which I didn't do, by the way. But she told me to put the sign away because she said it was triggering her. Never mind the actual triggers pulled on these actual people. Just don't make me look at it. You see, rather than dealing with reality and how it can actually be changed, these wokesters think that they can create their own reality. They cook up these feel-good utopian schemes and then try to impose that on reality. Which is funny because communists like us are always accused of doing that. Which is complete nonsense because communist revolution is actually the only real alternative to capitalism. Taking the means of production out of the hands of the tiny class of capitalist exploiters who currently own it and unleashing that production and creative potential to meet the material and intellectual needs of humanity rather than the profit of a few. It's actually the only sane and rational way to organize society right now. But think about the totally unrealistic reformist schemes of these wokesters. Defund and abolish the police, they talk about. Come on. Trying to abolish the police without a revolution to overthrow and abolish the capitalist system the police enforce? It makes about as much sense as trying to abolish overseers and runaway slave patrols without abolishing slavery. Or there's this one. Maybe you've heard it before. Some people say, don't worry about the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade because we'll always have abortion pills. Yes, a bunch of idiots actually made this argument. In fact, it was the main message from the woke wing of the Democratic Party last year as abortion rights were being wiped out. Never mind the fact that many poor women and incarcerated women don't have access to these pills. Never mind the fact that the Christian fascists are not going to stop until they have a total nationwide ban on all forms of abortion. Just don't make me have to get out of my comfort zone and put something on the line to stop this assault on half of humanity. And see, here's where this woke shit becomes not just useless, not just out of touch with reality and destructive, but downright counter-revolutionary. Because there was a group that sounded the alarm and called people in the streets to wage mass sustained protests and resistance at such a level that it could stop the overturning of Roe v. Wade. That group was riseupfораbortionrights.org, which was co-initiated and led by Sansara Taylor, the co-host of the Revolution Nothing Less show, a follower of Bob Avakian, together with others from different perspectives. But the wokesters attacked them. They called Rise Up for Abortion Rights racist for saying that forced motherhood is female enslavement. But what else do you call it when the state hijacks women's bodies and turns them into incubators? They accused Rise Up of fear-mongering for using the wire coat hanger and bloody pants to show how women die without access to legal abortion, even though this is true. They called Sansara transphobic for simply using the word women to describe who was being targeted by these abortion bans, rather than pretending like the misogynist assault on abortion was motivated by some vague, genderless attack on people with uteruses. Most of all, they attacked Bob Avakian, who was way ahead of his time in analyzing the Christian fascist movement and how their attack on abortion concentrates the question of whether women, yes, women, will be enslaved or emancipated. In fact, there's no one these wokesters hate more than B.A. Yeah, they talk shit about him for being a white male. They spread lies and slander claiming he's some kind of creepy cult leader as a way to scare people away from critical thinking and prevent them from actually reading what he's got to say. But let's be honest, these wokesters are perfectly fine with white male leaders as long as they're white allies promoting a more diverse capitalism and leading people to fall in line with that. The real reason they have so much venom for B.A. is because he tells the scientific, evidence-based truth about this system and why it can't be reformed. And he is daring to lead people of all backgrounds to put it all on the line for revolution. And not just any revolution, but a communist revolution to abolish all forms of oppression and exploitation. And the more that B.A. and this revolution get out there, the more it shatters the alternate reality these wokesters hide in and try to rule over. And the more it exposes how paltry and reformist their little schemes are, how fraudulent their radical posturing and claims to represent the marginalized actually is. And it's one thing for people to debate and even fiercely disagree with what BA is putting forward. Does what he's saying reflect reality and how to solve the horrible problems humanity faces or not? That kind of substantive and principled struggle is not only welcome, it is in short supply and very much needed. And we can all learn from it. But it is something very different to spread lies and ad hominem attacks aimed at shutting down real engagement and debate. And it is an indictment of the culture today that this kind of trash talk has currency, rather than being totally rejected by everyone who cares about truth and a better world. So before moving on to compare and contrast more fully the woke framework versus the framework of the new communism developed by Bob Avakian, let me just pose a question whose answer should be obvious. Did all the attacks on Sansara Taylor and the one group that was leading tens of thousands into the streets against the Supreme Court overturning of abortion rights, all the false accusations of transphobia, did that help the struggle for trans rights and women's rights? Or did the wokesters' dishonest and divisive attacks actually aid and strengthen the forces of Christian fascism in their effort to force women and trans people into a Handmaid's Tale nightmare? Did the wokesters' ignorant and cowardly claims of cults, their efforts to keep people from even engaging Bob Avakian's work, did that help the marginalized and oppressed? Or did that aid the system in targeting revolutionary leaders and keeping people away from the actual solution to all this oppression, namely revolution? And here, I want to briefly address something that came up repeatedly in the first round of this tour. People would tell us that when you criticize wokeness, you sound like Ron DeSantis. First of all, if you can't tell the difference between us and that Florida fascist, I feel sorry for you. DeSantis is just using woke as a cover to attack black history and LGBT rights and whip up his fascist base to violently impose an even more horrific form of this capitalist imperialist system. We are taking on wokeism precisely in order to win growing numbers, to take up the fight to overthrow this system and get to a world where white supremacy, patriarchy, and U.S. imperialism are no more. See the difference? Others would be a bit more nuanced and say, yeah, but, you're reinforcing fascist talking points. No. This woke shit is reinforcing actual fascism for all the reasons I've been speaking to. It paralyzes and diverts the people who should be standing up against this fascism and fighting to put an end to the system that spawned it. These fascists love to see their enemies, liberals, progressives, people of color. They love to see them caught up in this cancel culture, tearing each other down. They love to see them acting like soft crybabies who are triggered at the smallest things that make them uncomfortable. As far as these fascists are concerned, it just makes these woke folk easy prey, easy kill. And they love to mock the most loony expressions of this wokeness and use that to deny the existence of actual oppression. You can turn on Fox News any day and see them doing this. This woke shit is not just a dead end. It is actively, viciously harmful. Everywhere we went on this first round of this speaking tour, UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC San Diego, we encountered so many people grumbling about this. Students scared to talk about race or gender because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. Professors who feel like they're walking on eggshells. A Latino professor I talked to who got canceled by his students for using the N-word in the context of reading an academic paper by a black scholar. A prominent African-American studies professor who said she tries to avoid using pronouns altogether for fear of accidentally misgendering someone. A professor from South Asia who commented on how ridiculous it is that students in the U.S. are so concerned about who gets to use which bathroom while half the world doesn't even have indoor plumbing. Students, intellectuals, artists are being suffocated and intimidated by this. But almost no one besides the RevComs is standing up to it. Some of that has to do with the personal price you pay, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that while many decent people don't like the most egregious expressions of this woke lunacy, they share a lot of the same framework and basic assumptions. So we need to talk about that. What are the premises of this woke framework? And how do they work against understanding the actual problem humanity faces and the real solution? I have 4 points on this, and I'm going to be drawing a lot from Sunsara Taylor's presentation at UCLA in the spring. So let's get into it. 1, do we each have our own truth, or is there one objective reality that anyone can discover using the tools of science? Woke identity politics insists that because different identity groups and even different people have different experiences, that therefore everyone has their own truth. You hear this all the time. Your truth, my truth. Woke identity politics also claims that only those who experience marginalization directly can truly understand it or what must be done about it. Everyone else, especially old white men, should just check their privilege, stay in their lanes, and follow the marginalized. They even claim that science and objective reality itself are white supremacist constructs. This is wrong on so many levels. Just think about it. The planet is warming due to human-caused climate change for all of us. That is not my truth. That is not your truth. It is the truth. It is true because it corresponds to reality. It can be proven with evidence, and it would be true whether or not anyone of any identity recognized it. Just like the earth was round, even when everyone on the planet thought it was flat. Of course, different people have different experiences, but this does not mean that there are different realities. Experience is important to learn from. It's part of reality. Everyone needs to hear the horror stories of women who got pregnant before Roe v. Wade, the things they had to do to get illegal and often botched back alley abortions, the shame and humiliation, the friends who died. Men need to learn what it's like to be a woman in this society, the constant calculations you have to make when you go out walking or jogging. What am I wearing? What time does the sun go down? Is anyone else on the street? Do I ignore or confront the guy that's following me? How am I going to use my keys to stab this motherfucker if he attacks me? Yes, listen, learn, and ask yourself, why the fuck should we allow a system like this to go on for one more day? But to really put an end to these outrages, you have to get to the root of them. And that requires science, not just experience. You have to look at the larger reality these experiences are part of, and look beneath the surface at the deeper dynamics and causes and the pathways for change. In fact, oftentimes experience can lead you to the wrong conclusions. Think about how many immigrants who are coming from countries in Latin America that have been exploited and ravaged by U.S. imperialism still get caught up in this American dream bullshit. Let's say you're a farmer in Mexico growing corn like your ancestors have done for hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden, in the mid-1990s, all this cheap corn starts showing up in the market, and you just can't compete with that. So now you have to sell your land, leave everything behind, and head north. Well, just because you experienced all that doesn't mean you understand how the U.S. actually forced a trade agreement on Mexico in 1994, which flooded the country with highly subsidized corn, intentionally ruined millions of small farmers just like you, driving many of them to work in U.S.-owned sweatshops on the border or else risk their lives crossing over, only to end up as a super exploited labor force on this side. But you think to yourself, at least now I'm able to make a living. And you look around at all the wealth and skyscrapers and consumer goods, and you start thinking, based on your own experience, that maybe the U.S. is the land of opportunity. No. You just got fucked by this country, and then you got mind-fucked. Oppressed people and everyone desperately need science to pull the lens back and see the patterns, to make the connections and drill down to the root of this shit. They desperately need the science of the new communism developed by Bob Avakian so they can understand how this capitalist system that they're enmeshed in actually works and how we could organize society a whole different way. They don't need condescending saviors protecting them from being challenged by ideas outside their direct experience, or pandering to them, idealizing them, and pretending like they know everything already. If just being oppressed was all it took to understand how to end oppression, don't you think it would have happened by now? This system works on oppressed people just like it works on everyone else. It gets them caught up in the individualistic struggle to survive. It pits them against each other. It brainwashes them with religion and American chauvinism and racism and patriarchy. These are mental chains, and people need to break them. And they need leaders who respect them enough to struggle with them to do that, and to rise to their full potential as revolutionaries and emancipators of humanity. This is what Bob Avakian is all about. This is why he struggles so hard with the masses of people, even if some of them get offended at first. And this is what all of you here today need to do, or else these horrors will just keep getting worse. But woke lunacy refuses all this. It stands in the way of it. It shouts it down, because all you can know is direct experience, so shut up and follow those who are black, or BIPOC, or trans, or whatever's most fashionable at the moment. All this keeps people at the surface, keeps people trapped at the surface, ignorant and unable to learn the deeper causes of things, left prey to being manipulated by charlatans who commodify oppressed identity to tell you to fall in line behind them regardless of where it is they are leading you. Okay. Is it too loud or not loud enough?
We're trying to get like more even.
Okay.
That's all.
All right.
Helpful for when you actually stand up.
Okay. Okay. Okay, point 1. Now we're on to point 2.
Bring it up a bit. While you're drinking.
That's no problem.
I can bring it up a tiny bit. Yeah, I think we got
Check, check, check. Should I bring it closer to my mouth?
it. Yeah, although, yeah.
Okay. But don't shout.
Live and unrehearsed.
Okay, point 2. Is the problem in society and the world marginalization, or is it oppression? And why does this matter? Wokesters talk constantly about marginalization. Rarely do they talk about oppression. But if you think the problem is that some identity groups are cast to the margins of society, then the solution that flows from that is to fight for inclusion of those groups, or at least some from within those groups, in the center of society. And we hear this demand for inclusion and representation and the centering of the marginalized all the time. But ask yourself, did it make any difference at all to Tyree Nichols that the 5 cops who mercilessly beat him to death while he was crying out for his mother, did it make any difference to him that those 5 cops were black? Did it make 1 ounce of difference to him that the police chief of that department was a black woman? Or what about the parents of the 526 children in Gaza who were killed by Israeli security forces back in 2014? Do you think they gave a fuck that this was backed by Hillary Clinton, a female Secretary of State, and Barack Obama, the first black president? These wokesters act as if the advancement of a few individuals from among different oppressed groups within this system somehow serves the oppressed as a whole. It does not. Of course, discrimination at every level needs to be fought. But the problem is not marginalization. It is oppression, the pressing down of whole sections of people. And if you recognize that, then the question becomes, what is it going to take to uproot that oppression? Which means you have to look at the system this oppression is rooted in. It is the system of capitalism imperialism. And uprooting this oppression requires overthrowing this system. So do you really want to squander your energy putting new faces on the same rotten system, helping this system to rebrand itself and bamboozle people? No. We need to get organized now. You need to get with the RevComs now so we can seize this rare time to actually overthrow this system and replace it with a radically different system that doesn't require this oppression. 3. Is cancel culture a tool that empowers the powerless, or is it a grotesque expression of the values of this dog-eat-dog capitalist system and the profoundly lowered sights of those who can't see beyond it? Those who defend cancel culture claim it's the way to level the playing field, to allow everyday people to take down the powerful who would otherwise be untouchable. Ernest Owens, in his book, The Case for Cancel Culture, called it a democratic tool that works to liberate us all. This is wrong on many levels. First, what are the methods and morality of cancel culture? It is to go through someone's entire life to find something they did wrong, whether significant or trivial or completely fabricated, and then reduce them to it, shame them for it, and throw them away. Rather than looking at the arc of someone's life to see what is the main thing about them and how they're changing or could be struggled with to change, they're canceled. Anyone defends them, they get canceled too. All this erases nuance or complexity as well as the presumption of innocence. Accusations alone are treated as proof of guilt. This is revenge. It has nothing to do with justice. And these days, people get canceled not just for doing something wrong, but for daring to do things that are good while being the wrong identity. Dana Schutz, who painted a powerful picture commemorating Emmett Till's open casket, got featured in the Whitney Museum's 2017 biennial. Then, some narrow-minded woke hustlers trashed her because she's white, and this is not her story to tell. They demanded that the artwork be destroyed. Destroying art that you don't agree with? You know who else does that? The Taliban. And while their particular dogma is different, the methods of these wokesters are not fundamentally any different. But let's look deeper. What is the underlying premise of cancel culture? It's that people can't change. And if people can't change, then the world can't change. How convenient for this system and the wokesters clawing to get in on it. But this isn't true. If it were true, Detroit Red, who went around robbing folks, never would have become Malcolm X. If it were true, the U.S. vets who witnessed and even carried out horrific war crimes in Vietnam never could have come home to expose these crimes to the world at great risk to themselves and then throw their medals over the White House fence in one of the most courageous and impactful anti-war acts of a generation. And this kind of thing can be true on an even bigger scale as we come together to fight against injustice and oppression while building up the strength to make a real revolution, changing ourselves in the course of changing the world. Finally, what effect does this cancel culture have on people with real power? Try canceling the U.S. military with a Twitter mob. Try canceling the fascists. They don't give a damn. In fact, they'll wear your shaming like a badge. And let's be honest, this canceling is just playing around and wrecking those who will be intimidated by you. All while the real enemy laughs at the way our side is cannibalizing each other. Do you really want to feed this destructive, demoralizing, and degrading cycle? Or will you stand up to it and fight with largeness of mind and generosity of spirit to work together to change ourselves in the course of changing the world? 4. Should the goal be to guard ourselves with trigger warnings and safe spaces within this monstrous system? Or do we all need to get out of our comfort zones and put it on the line to make a real revolution and bring about a world that is actually safe for the masses of oppressed humanity here and all over the world? In a recent article in The Atlantic, Jill Filipovich writes about the multiplying and increasingly unhinged demands for trigger warnings. She recounts, quote, "When I wrote that a piece of conservative legislation was so awful it made me want to throw up. One commenter asked for an eating disorder trigger warning. When I posted a link to a funny BuzzFeed photo compilation, a commenter said it needed a trigger warning because the pictures of cats attacking dogs look like domestic violence." End quote. On the first leg of this tour at UC San Diego, students actually complained that the term woke lunacy was offensive and triggering to people with mental illnesses. So while it may be tempting to roll your eyes at these examples, this kind of thing is having real-world consequences. An art history professor at Hamlin University was fired because her students were offended that she showed them a work of art depicting the Prophet Muhammad after she had warned them and gave them the chance to opt out. Here I want to quote from Bob Avakian from his work, Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating. He writes, "There is too much of people being absorbed in trauma culture, where any insult or affront or challenge to one's cherished beliefs is treated as actual trauma, and any real trauma that is suffered becomes a motivation to turn inward and focus on individual self-care." He goes on, Enough of woke folk who act as if it's actually oppressed people, or as they like to say, the marginalized, who are fragile beings constantly in need of protection of safe spaces, lest they fall apart at the mere appearance of a triggering phenomenon. And since when are universities and institutions supposed to be places where you're safe, not just from physical violence of one kind or another, but from overtly threatening or clearly degrading verbal assaults, but safe from ideas and statements that simply make you uncomfortable? How are you going to change the world if you're in danger at falling apart at things like that? In any real struggle to deal with any real oppression, up against powerful enforcers of that oppression, you are going to have to face the prospect of real sacrifice, including the prospect of being physically attacked. And if you think you can carve out little safe enclaves, and that this is somehow going to lead to any kind of significant change in society, you are full of illusions and delusions. And let's be honest, the little enclaves of safe space that woke folk are fighting for within this country rest on the horror this country inflicts around the world. They rest on the Congolese children slaving in mines for the coltan and their cell phones. They rest on the Bangladeshi women locked in dangerous fire-trap sweatshops, stitching their clothes. They rest on migrants who left children thousands of miles behind and risked deaths in deserts and jungles to come here and pick their fruit. But you see, for all their endless talk of privilege, the one privilege the woke identity hustlers rarely talk about is American privilege. The privilege that comes from living in the USA, a country that plunders the world and whose wealth and power rest on brutal exploitation and oppression throughout the world, backed up by the massive violence of the American military. These hustlers want all they can get of that privilege. Is that what you want? Or do you want to end this? In coming to a conclusion, I think it should be clear by now that between wokedom on the one hand and real revolution on the other, we are talking about two radically different worldviews that lead to two radically different worlds. Think about the tremendous harm that is already being done in the academic spaces and the corners of the internet that these wokesters dominate. But imagine if they got real power. Sometimes you hear these wokesters say things like, I don't want to read dead white males. But imagine if someone like this ran the education department. Yes, of course, women and people of color who've been shut out should be brought into the curriculum. But do you really want to live in a world without Shakespeare, Darwin, Marx? In contrast to the narrow horizons of woke identity politics, as it says in something I don't have right now, which is do we have the We Need, We Demand pamphlet here? I meant to bring this up. Oh, here we go. Perfect. Thank you. With Raymond's notes on it. As it says in this statement, we need and we demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system, which talks about the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, written by Bob Avakian. As it says in this, the purpose of the educational system in the new socialist society will be to enable people to pursue the truth wherever it leads, with a spirit of critical thinking and scientific curiosity, and in this way to continually learn about the world and be better able to contribute to changing it in accordance with the fundamental interests of humanity. And that's just one part of a whole blueprint we have for a real alternative to this system. The Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, as I've been talking about. We have game-changing leadership for this revolution, which you can see for yourself in the Bob Avakian interviews on our YouTube channel. We have analysis and guidance every week on our website, revcom.us, and the Revolution Nothing Less show at youtube.com/therevcoms. Get into this, engage it deeply, and spread it everywhere. Because right now, we have an opening like we've never had. A chance to bring this horrific system down and replace it with something far better. Something that would give a beautiful future to new generations all over the world. And it might not seem that way on the surface, with so much hopelessness and so many caught up in wokeism and other mental chains. But think for a second about how intense things are getting. The planet is literally on fire. The American Nazis are on the march, and the storm clouds of world war are gathering. We need unity against oppression, not dividing people by identity. So why the hell should anyone waste precious time being intimidated by these little schoolyard bullies when we have a world to win? It's time to stop canceling each other and cancel this system. As Bob Avakian has written recently, especially at a time like this, a time when big things are up in the world, affecting the whole future of humanity. When those big-time exploiters and oppressors who rule over us in this country are bitterly divided among themselves and increasingly unable to hold things together as a unified ruling class. When there is not just an urgent need, but a real possibility to seize on this situation, to overthrow them altogether. If you are not getting with the RevComs, the revolutionary communists who are working every day for this revolution, if you are not part of working to bring about this revolution, then what the hell are you doing? Thank you.
Yeah, take this. All right, let's give Rafi another round of applause. You know, he came out here from Los Angeles. You know, before we open it up to comment and discussion, I want to call on people to support this initiative, the Woke Lunacy versus Real Revolution initiative, and to support this bookstore. Imagine this talk that you just heard being delivered, you know, on campuses, you know, elite campuses, state universities, you know, really going into the jaws of the beast of woke lunacy and opening this debate up and creating an atmosphere where people are not going to feel intimidated in the ways that he described, and also showing that the emperor has no clothes, that this woke lunacy is a lunatic mode of thinking. So this tour that began last spring is going to be ramped up in the fall. And to do that, it's not too difficult to discern that you need funds for travel, for promotion, for literature. So I call upon you to donate. And what we're going to do tonight is share the proceeds between the Woke Lunacy versus Real Revolution initiative and tour and Revolution Books. Now, everyone should have received the brochure for the $30,000 summer fund drive of Revolution Books, the title of which is At a Time of Great Danger and Revolutionary Possibility, Be Part of Something Truly Emancipating. And you experienced that tonight, right? We are opening up this debate. At a time when revolution is more possible, there are these, what I like to call, millstones around people's necks that are holding people back from taking up and becoming part of and contributing to the revolution that is in the highest interest of humanity. Those two millstones are this woke lunacy and the verdict on communism. I mean, anybody that comes into this bookstore and they hear, oh, you're promoting the new communism, or they say communism? I mean, really, that's not the right word to be using. That's a big turnoff. Why? Well, because everyone knows. No. Everybody knows what's been drilled into their heads, that communism is a catastrophe. No. I mean, you here at Revolution Books can learn about the new communism that has been developed by Bob Avakian. And we show and get into discussions about the new Bob Avakian interviews. Heart and soul, hardcore for revolution. And we get into his work and we spread it. And on this brochure, it opens with this passage. Revolution Books is on a mission, and we invite you to support and be part of the mission to make a real revolution and its leadership known, engaged, and debated throughout society as this country fractures. The future we get has everything to do with what all of us do. The future we get has everything to do with what all of us do. And here at Revolution Books, you can become part of this revolution to change everything. That's something. So we cannot survive, we cannot thrive without your involvement in the life of this bookstore, without your support, without your donations. You know, look, 10 days ago, we organized a tour to the Brooklyn Museum where there's a Picasso exhibit, which has been curated by someone with this whole woke lunacy. So we went and we said, we're going to see for ourselves. And we had a discussion afterward, and we're going to be writing about this. But that's what happens at Revolution Books. We are opening up these debates. We had a special program on the film Oppenheimer and what happened in World War II. And why is it that Oppenheimer is not a hero and not a tortured soul, but a motherfucking war criminal? That is a little disturbing and unsettling, but it is the truth. We get at the truth here. All right? What Rafi said. Get out of your comfort zone, because you can't understand and change the world if you are not unsettled. So I'm calling on people to donate to this tour that Rafi is undertaking. It's round 2, right? Started in the spring. And then we're going to, you're contributing to Revolution Books as well, so that we can have these kinds of programs, so that many more people can learn about them. You know, it's cool that we have the audience that we have tonight, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. But we need exponentially larger audiences. We're talking about putting revolution on the map, the revolution that Rafa was talking about. That's what you're contributing to, and you're learning about it, right? We don't expect everyone to agree or get. It's something that you can contribute to this life contribute to the life of this bookstore and to the store as you are learning more about this revolution and raising your questions. So that's the spirit and the atmosphere of this store and of the revolution that we're talking about. To know the world, to change it. To know it ever more deeply and profoundly, to change it ever more deeply and profoundly. And we have in Bob Avakian the method and approach to do that, and the vision and the strategy. And time is running. The clock is running. The window that he's talking about to seize on is not going to be open forever, because these fascists are on a rampage. This is high-stakes stuff. So, with that, I don't know, is there a bucket we can pass around now? Okay? Well, I want to do that very quickly. And then you can talk with Brenda. Raise your hand. Jane, if she's... is Jane here? Jane, raise your hand. Okay. And you can talk with them about making a donation, additional donation, and if you want to get involved in this bookstore, you know, it's there. It's there for the taking, and we welcome all of you, okay? So that's it for this segment. We're now going to remove the podium and open it up to all of you. So, again, thanks for coming out, and let's do it.
Yeah.
Let them do it.
We should move this over a little bit, right?
Yeah. So I'll
All right.
call on. Whatever.
Well, I was just gonna say, we should just get into it, you guys. You know, woke lunacy versus real revolution. Thoughts, comments, questions, agreements, disagreements, things that stood out. You're saying go a little more this way. Okay. He's coming more.
And remember to talk into the mic, because that's the only way we can pick it up.
Yeah. So just raise your hands. Yeah, in the back.
While I do understand the frame of woke is destructive, I would also like to say that throughout the presentation, I think that argument in itself is a little bit destructive in the sense that it's viewed in the single axis of, I would say, white-centered perspective. Woke has been a terminology, as you stated in the beginning, that was a term, AAVE, African American vernacular, and that term goes back to the late 20th century, the early 1920s, whatever, in which that term was to be awake. And so with that, people like Marcus Garvey in regards to the issues within Africa brought about that terminology being like wake up. And so with that, I do understand how wokeness in the lenses of what has been hijacked and perpetuated by white streamed media. And this is not to say that, without the allyship of some white individuals that they understand that they don't understand the destructiveness of what wokeness can be. But I would also like to say that wokeness isn't a bad thing, especially in the argument where you're talking about how these different identities, how more than ever people are like, oh, this such and so, and like it's not much of a group, and the whole idea of truth, and that is one rather than a truth, and which to that I have to disagree, because I think the beauty of just activism, and particularly with these marginalized groups, is about finding the intersectionalities. And so there's no issue with having these different identities. And for that, it helps with the formulation and the stance and the grandeur of having these conversations and raising up to what is not okay in society. And so again, to say that woke is destructive, I do understand. But the arguments around it, which I particularly hear, is a single axis similar to what white feminism is. It's like, while I do understand what is being perpetuated and said, but are you listening to the marginalized groups who instead have said, oh, this is why, wokeness is something that is actually, something of good means, or this is why we feel this particular way. And so for the instance, when you're discussing about trigger warnings, while I do understand sometimes, like with the given examples of trigger warning because of this article, what was it, that they almost threw up or something because of how, bad, whatever it was. And so I understand that that's, lunatic, that doesn't make sense. But I think in some of the arguments you made, I think that they don't really, I think that you can't really compare them in the sense of some are just on a different spectrum as others. So that narrative kind of creates false equivalency. You can't really compare, I forgot which instance it was, but going back to the commentary about trigger warnings, I understand, but something that I just find interesting particularly about that is that the older generations being, I'm Gen Z, being millennial, being such and so, I always just find it interesting why particularly trigger warnings bother you. I think, yes, I can understand that it allows people to hide and not try to recognize the cruelness and the brutalities of what happens in society, but some people, let's say, for things that are really grotesque that people should not be exposed with without a warning, that is important. And also,
can I just ask you, what do you think about the example that I gave in the presentation?
Oh yeah, I'm going to that point.
Where I was on the UC Berkeley campus, and someone from the Black Student Union came up to me and said, "Put that sign away." And keep in mind, we were organizing students to actually do something to stop this atrocity, this unending epidemic of police murder of black and brown people. And a student came up to me and said, "Put that sign away. Stop doing this," rather than joining in the actual fight to stop this because it's triggering her. What do you think about that example?
This was a black individual, said?
Yeah.
Well, I understand that when it comes to this news of police brutality, it's something that is kind of just all over media. It's something that, while my people, being black individuals, have become desensitized to it, but when there's bold statements or such and so, discussions of that, that image, yes, it's triggering. I understand. Sometimes, yes, those discussions can be had, which is fine. There's no problem with that discussion you had, but the response to it being what is it? That, yes, it's triggering, but, this is reality? Yes, it's reality, and some people just don't want to have those images of recurrence. I
think that speaks exactly to the point. Yes, it's reality, but some people don't want to confront that reality and don't want to do anything to deal with that reality, so they're hiding from it. They're avoiding it. And just, you said a lot, so I just wanted to address, you started by saying this is a term that came out of the AAVE, going back decades, right? But I made the point that it has actually mutated into that's true. It started as just awareness of injustice, or just awareness in general, but it's mutated into something very toxic. And it is actually doing a lot of damage. It's an anti-scientific philosophy that doesn't, how do you have any chance of changing the world if you don't even recognize that objective reality is real? And if you're spending your time, rather than shining a light on that reality and trying to see how it can be changed, you're spending your time dictating to people what parts of reality can be talked about, who has a right to talk about reality. You're literally spending your time telling people, who are trying to do good, telling, to stay in their lanes. Does that help the struggle to end oppression, or does that actually aid the system? If everyone's in their own little lane, only able to understand their own direct experience, does that help people understand the world? Does it help people understand the systemic causes that are underlying it that no one can understand just based on their direct experience? I don't care how oppressed you are. There's no way you can understand the actual system that's at the root of that oppression, or how it can be ended just based on your direct experience. People need science. They need revolutionary theory. But this woke shit not only is unscientific, it actually is mainly focused on outlawing that deeper analysis of things. It keeps people on the surface. And then beyond that, politically, it's not actually aimed at, ending all this oppression. It's aimed on representation, inclusion, a seat at the table. But what is that table? It's this monstrous fucking capitalist system that needs to be overthrown. A system that has white supremacy and patriarchy built into it. I don't care how, that's the example of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton presiding over horrible crimes against people here and all over the world. And then morally speaking, there's this bloodlust to tear into other people, to be the first one on social media to go after someone for like the smallest things. We need to have a whole different culture, and fundamentally this woke, ideology, it's a product of capitalism. It's turning oppression into a commodity that you can use to leverage, and you can gain a better position over others. But it's all in a very, narrow sphere. Within a little sphere of the internet or academia or whatever woke space it is, you can exercise some power. You can reverse some social relations, but within a very narrow sphere, while the gears of this fucking system keep grinding up the lives of the masses of humanity. But the wokesters are oblivious to that. They're not talking about, they want more representation for the marginalized within these little woke spaces of empire. They're not thinking about the Bangladeshi factory workers stitching their clothes and what's it going to take to put an end to that system that creates those conditions where factories are burning to the ground with women inside them. This is the harm that it's doing, and especially in a moment like this, when you literally have the planet is burning, world war is looming on the horizon. These fucking fascists are on the march and well armed. And if you think you can deal with that by hiding in safe spaces and trigger warnings, you are deluding yourself. Like, we need people, we need to change this situation where these fascists are on the offensive. They're convinced that their fucking narrative is the truth, and they want to impose that shit on everyone else. And the decent people aren't even sure there is such a thing as truth. And they're cannibalizing each other. That needs to change now. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for opening this discussion. But it was also very challenging to speak back to it, or to weave my responses through the entire talk. I did watch the Sincera presentation, which you were a part of, and it really, really affected me very powerfully about we have to talk about the truth. We have to talk about history. We have to talk about language. And I think it's really time that we start talking about tools rather than fighting with each other about who is correct, who is what the privilege of our color of our skin is on either color of the skin. And how do I deal with that? I'm a white gay man, okay? It took a long time where people like myself could get up and say that at a meeting like this without being hooted at, booed at, and pushed out, okay? So I want to talk very specifically about some of the issues you brought up. The privilege of saying trigger warning, of a student saying trigger, don't show me that, I can't see that. The reality is just trauma is all over the place here. And that is real. And how you present it, any of us, how we present these arguments has to be sensitive to the trauma aspect for some people who may be in the room. But we have to talk the truth. We have to talk about what language is. I mean, this Orwellian moment that we're in where a word that used to have a meaning has no more meaning. Take the word woman. and watching the bourgeois feminist movement adopting the trans language, which denies the existence of a female, of a woman, and uses words like people with uteruses. We have to, I guess, did she leave? Okay, because the problem sometimes is people leave, they say what they want to say, but they don't stay to engage. And that's what we have to learn. I'm trying to learn how to talk to people I don't agree with about the things that really fucking matter to me. And I start with trying to find out how they really feel and not the rhetoric. So the tools, and that's what I hope that you and Sansara and the other people that are developing this tour will talk about the tools that we can learn to how to break through this mindset, which is, you know, I'd rather have a lumpen on the stage than an academic who's sunk into this kind of madness and politeness. Being sensitive to someone else and being polite are two very different things. Politeness means you can't talk about a lot of things because you'll embarrass somebody. Now, I'm talking very generalized. I'm not talking directly to what you brought up, but a reality check is absolutely important. And yes, it's disruptive. And it has to be done in a clear, precision way. And it has to be respectful of difference. Every woman, every man, every they who may be in this room, their body belongs to them. Their bodies don't belong to Jim. That's what makes me support the right for women to choose, the right to control their own bodies. Slavery taught us a big lesson about not controlling your body, I want to just bring Malcolm X into the room for a moment. I want to talk about someone who changed, someone who learned, someone who started here and went to there. And that's what, trying to explain that, trying to use that example. Or Sandra Blair. Does anyone in this room think she committed suicide? I can never get Sandra Blair out of my head because I would have done the same thing to that cop, that over-steroid cop screaming at her with his muscles, bouncing around. So I bring Sandra Blair in the room. And I hope that she feels good about what happened yesterday because a black woman was not afraid. She was fearless to stand up to all the pressure she was under and tried to speak the truth. I don't mean to give a speech here. I'm sorry. I was hoping that the sister was still here, but we have to learn how to stay in the room.
Well, I appreciate those comments. Let's see if there are other questions, comments. I see one in the back, and then we'll come to you in the front.
Just picking up on the conversation started about what type of tools can we use, and also just staying to start that I agree that the cancel culture is very toxic, and I think that a lot of the new identities that are rising and a lot of the language around it is very divisive. It's a very divide and conquer tactic. I agree with that. But I think that as far as, yes, there is one objective reality, but each individual person experiences that reality very differently, which I think can impeach someone's ability to understand certain things. And I think that the further removed you are from certain types of oppression in those situations, the harder it is for some people to really empathize and actually understand what those oppressed communities are going through. And so in that way, we are living different we're living different truths, you know, like so that in that way they just can't really breach that gap to kind of meet halfway and understand. And so my question is, you know, what is a tool that we can use? How can we better communicate with these people to bridge that gap and reach a level of understanding that they have a hard time reaching simply just because they aren't exposed to certain types of life.
When you're talking about bridge the gap, you're talking about like people with more privilege who may not understand certain things or may not have experienced certain things?
Well, you know, affluenza, yes.
Yeah, well, okay, first of all, that's a good question. I just want to step back to what is truth, because you went from people have different experiences, which is true. we people do have all kind of, you know, they do have different experiences. Like when I am in front of a cop and I stick my hands in my pockets, I don't have to worry the same way as a black person does about getting murdered, you know, being seen as a threat in the same way, right? And, you know, I gave the example about what women have to go through just going for a jog in this fucking society, you know, and I don't have to deal with that, right? But, but then you went from that, the fact that people have different experiences, to saying different truths. But truth just means... Truth is a correct correspondence with reality. That's all truth means. It means it corresponds to reality. And, you know, experiences are part of reality, but that's something anyone can come to understand. That's why it is actually important for people to, you know, hear the stories and learn the experiences of other people. I mean, how do we bridge that gap? It means people have to learn what other people go through. It's, you know, people should actually learn about the migrants right now who are crossing the Darien Gap in Panama through the jungles, basically trying to, you know, get to the north, right? And, you know, they're on foot going through horrendous situations. People are dying along the way. They're having to leave all their shit in the jungle, in the mud, because they can't carry it all. Little babies are going through this. They're getting sick. Some of them are dying. People have to learn about this, but then, you know, and it is part of coming to empathize with other people. I think that's really important. We have to get out of a situation where people are just concerned about themselves and they're just concerned about their identity group. You know, they have to, and especially for people in America, they have to start thinking about, you know, not just about Americans, but the people of the world. That's very important. But why are people having to go on that journey from the Darien Gap? You know, why are so many of them Venezuelan? What's going on in Venezuela? Do you know about the sanctions that the U.S. has put on the country of Venezuela, knowing that it's going to cause malnutrition for like millions of little children in that country, forcing parents to have to flee? You know, this is the kind of thing that actually, it doesn't just come from experience. It comes from like actually an analysis of the situation. This is the essential thing. If you're just trying to empathize with other people, well, you should just learn their experiences. But if you actually want to stop this shit, you have to learn what's the system behind it. You know, you have to actually dig down to the roots of it. You know, our friend over here mentioned intersectionality. All right, I think she talked about intersections, right, and different axes of oppression. And, you know, intersectionality analyzes there's, you know, racism, there's gender oppression, there's oppression based on sexuality, there's all these different axes of oppression. But what it doesn't get to is what's the actual underlying system that all this oppression is rooted in. It's a global system of capitalism, imperialism. You know, and this is actually, how do you bridge that gap? You have to dig down to the roots of that system. Because not only is there a problem with people not understanding each other's experiences, but as long as you have this capitalist imperialist system in place, different groups will be pitted against each other. Different identity groups. And some of that will be the conscious manipulation of the powers that be, the way that they consciously pit different groups against each other. You know, but some of it is just everyone, you know, under capitalism, you just got to pursue your self-interest. You know, people may know about, there was Cherokee Indians, Native Americans who were Cherokee who owned slaves. And there were black people, Buffalo Soldiers celebrated in the Bob Marley song that went out west to slaughter Native Americans. You know, so this is how the system pits different oppressed groups against each other. So we got to get to the root of that system. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, but also in front, too. It's okay, both.
Hey, the statement is, I just going to be short and concise about it. The woke people need to go back to sleep. Seriously. You spoke of certain groups coming to the table of capitalism, imperialism, and Obama being one, and Hillary Clinton being one, and all the ruckus they started in the Palestinian state and all the atrocities that's still going on to this day. And since all this intersectionality is still present, this woke thing is just being like quite selfish. Like everyone wants their piece of the American pie, and everyone wants to live the American dream. Me being, first generation born of immigrants to this country, it says a lot. We always stress education in the home, and time again, all doors have opened not because of our skin color, or not because we were mixed race, or not because of this and that, but because of the knowledge that we knew in order to get certain things done in the world. I just think, what's the breaking point in which we all going to wake up and get on board with the revolution? That's the end point.
Let's take a couple and then we'll get to that.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. I have 2 points, one point and one question. The first thing is, even though I don't agree with the framing that the young woman who left, I don't agree with the framing. I went to an HBCU, a historically black college, in the 90s, and the mark of a politicized student, what was said was that you were supposed to be conscious and you were supposed to be woke, right? And so I hope that you can imagine how that might sound off-putting. That might be off-putting to speak about woke so dismissively when, we don't all start out as communists. We have to start somewhere, and maybe and perhaps being woke, and I'm not talking about what kind of a liberal identity politics that it's kind of been co-opted and appropriated into, but you might be able to imagine that kind of sounds kind of off-putting to maybe some of the folks that you might be interested in reaching with the woke lunacy and versus real revolution kind of tour. So yeah, that's one thing. Even though I don't agree, I'm sympathetic because I'm sitting up here. I came, and I'm like, man, I agree with all the points, but man, and I can see where. So that's one, and maybe the next.
Where's the but? You said you agree with all the points, but
I agree with all the points, but as I said before, that that this kind of dismissive discussion of woke is off-putting because, importantly, I noticed that maybe it might be helpful that maybe the next time this talk is given that you lead with an explanation of how woke was appropriated in that way and adopted by these kinds of by right-wingers and liberals who are trying, right? This is why I prefer the term liberal identity politics instead of woke. And that's not to say, but I understand that it's it's got punch, right? And but maybe I'm just throwing that out there. The second point, and this is a question, and maybe it's kind of piggybacking off of a couple of other questions, but as we all know, these kind of liberal identity politics are kind of like flooding the left, just all over the place, right? And I'm wondering if you have any thought about strategies for struggling through these issues within mass organizations, right? Like because like people come into the organizations and they're kind of inundated, they come from liberal spheres and all of this, and they're kind of inundated with like all of this like ideology, this liberal ideology, and it's kind of like, how do you struggle through that when the constant threat is that if my particular identity is not centered, or what my chosen cause is not centered properly within this organization, I will leave. And of course organizations are very afraid of, when they're trying to get membership, they're trying to like bring people in so that they can engage them, and the knee jerk is, I'm going to leave. What are some strategies that maybe you have or thought about in terms of how you deal with that?
Yeah, well,
thank you.
I think number one, we have to stop being defensive about, we have to take the shit on frontally. We have to stop being defensive about it. You're actually making an argument for how destructive this phenomenon is, whether you want to call it identity politics or whether you want to call it woke identity politics. We're talking about an objective phenomenon. I think it's important to call it woke identity politics, not, because it actually, look, people, this is something that's widely understood. It's a phenomenon that's widely understood. Yes, it's the right-wing fascists have, they use it and misuse it in the service of their fascist agenda, but it's also something that people who believe all the things that I was critiquing have put forward and have self-identified as woke. Maybe not so much in the last couple years or something, but this is something, I went to college in the late 90s too, and people actually referred to themselves as conscious at that time, which wasn't such a great thing either, just in and of itself, because what are you conscious of? You're aware of some injustice, but what the fuck are you doing about it? And do you really understand the root causes? And are you really being a revolutionary is different, is a leap from being conscious. Maybe being conscious of, aware of injustice might be a start. But this woke shit right now is not a start in the right direction. It's a start in the wrong direction. It's actually, it's destructive. You're giving an example of why it's destructive. Everywhere, I started the speaking tour in the spring with Sansara Taylor. She was the main one giving the speech, but I went to UC San Diego, UC Berkeley, UCLA. Everywhere we went, we encountered so many people, professors, students, like grumbling about this shit, feeling suffocated, self-censoring, but no one is taking it on. People are intimidated by this. We have to go out and it's like a religion on college campuses and in certain spheres, right? In certain nonprofit spheres, it's like a religion. We have to puncture that dogma, right now, and not just because we're anti-woke, but this is where it's so important that we're doing a woke lunacy versus real revolution tour, because we also have to lift people's sights to a whole different way that the world can be. Because fundamentally this woke identity politics, it rests on the premise that you can't really fundamentally change the world. So, the only power that you can really exercise is, I can't really change the world, but at least I can cancel my professor. And I will say this, we're also using the term woke lunacy because it actually has developed, it has mutated, from just awareness to and it absorbed the identity politics which existed beforehand, but it's taken really crazy forms. Some of these examples I was citing about the trigger warnings and some of the things that I personally experienced. We did a skit on these college campuses. It was part of building for the Sansara Taylor event. We did a skit where I would go out and make an announcement about, come here, Sansara Taylor at UCLA, blah, blah, blah. And then someone who was a woman of color would interrupt me, this was all staged or whatever, would interrupt me and say, who are you as a white person to be talking about revolution? And then we'd go back and forth, and that was part of our little, provoking people to want to come hear the talk. But sometimes when she would say, who are you to talk about, as a white man, to talk about revolution, she would gather a whole mob. I actually got physically assaulted multiple times by people in the course of doing this skit. So this is the kind of lunacy that's going on. And, books are being banned, not just by these murals are being whitewashed. By not just by these fascist Republicans, but by these wokesters. And in particular, I have noticed in the wake of the George Floyd uprising, this woke shit has taken another leap. And a lot of it does have to do with, people's sense that we tried to stop police brutality, but we didn't really accomplish much. So you sort of turn more inward. It becomes, now your target becomes someone at your nonprofit. You're trying to tear them down. You can't really change these bigger things. So, we have to frontally take on this woke lunacy and the underlying framework behind it. I tried to go into the philosophy behind it, the politics behind it, the morality behind it. People have to understand these premises and be able to have some grounding to stand on when they go up against this shit, or else they will still get intimidated. And we have to lift people's sights.
Yeah, just quick. Can I be heard? Yes. Yeah, just quickly. I know we really have to understand how harmful this is, because I wanted to connect the dots of your point about empathizing with the experience of those who suffer, in different kinds of ways, whose oppression, is felt, in certain kinds of ways that you, for instance, do not directly and viscerally experience, that I do not directly and viscerally experience. But let's think about how you take that privileging of immediate experience and you make that the beginning and the end of how one can understand the world and understand the life experience. But let's look at what you just said. We need empathy, which I completely and Rafi was emphasizing. But here's an author, and this is the role of art, that art enables you to leap beyond the immediacy of one's own life, to leap into different time zones historically. It's the literary imagination. But the woke lunacy shuts down an author like Janine Cummins, who wrote a book, American Dirt, a novel, a gripping, visceral novel of the experience of people fleeing Mexico, crossing the border because of gang violence, because of the threats to women, right? Rape and brutal treatment, and what they go through. And this book was shut down by these woke lunatics because the author was a white woman. But using the tools of art and the imagination, she actually created a work that brought to life that experience that was not directly hers. But she put it before people. And there was an uproar from these woke censors that this is no-go, that book should have been written by a Latino woman or by a Mexican woman. It's endless in terms of who has the right to speak and write and create art. But that work got shut down, and it was precisely doing what you're talking about, through the realm of art. So I'm just trying to emphasize the harmfulness of this. The publishers, had to backtrack on that book, and this is happening all over the place now. This is the identity politics police. And it's all about not her, but me. I should have gotten the contract. You know, it's extremely selfish. Rather than, here's a work of art. You can judge it. Is it good or is it bad? Does it have what kind of effect does it have? In this case, look, we sell the book here. Buy the book. You can judge for yourself, right? But it is an exquisite work of art. It is very painful to read because it's so real. So I wanted to make that point. And the second point is, there's a problem that people have about if the bad guys say this, then you can't say that. Okay? Woke. See, people should look up, and they will get a copy of this before they leave, the indictment of woke lunacy. In other words, it is a coherent way of understanding and navigating through the world, and it's very harmful. But these are the dimensions of it, and Rafa spoke to it. When the right-wing fanatics, right, we're talking about fascist insanity and woke lunacy. That's what's playing out in a big way in society. Now, as Rafa said, the right wing, the reactionaries, they use the phrase woke as a punching bag, to rationalize racism and patriarchy, and they are escalating their attacks on that. Because they say that about woke doesn't then require that we can't critique it from the very perspective that Rafa is talking about, the harmfulness of it. We're talking about woke lunacy. They have an agenda, which is to reinforce all this horror. The revolution, as Rafa was emphasizing, has an entirely different agenda, which is to uproot all of this. The racism, the patriarchy. And the same thing, we had a program here on the sexual exploitation of women through sex work. Okay? And what we were saying is that sex work, right, is the organized, marketed degradation and violent objectification, commodification of women. Now, is that true or not? We got into it. Yes. I mean, it is horrific. The trafficking in children and global prostitution and sexual tourism. And this is, the awful sexual degradation, the marketed degradation of women, for the pleasure and delectation of men. Now, right-wing Christian evangelists are completely opposed in theory to prostitution and to sex trafficking, and they have crusades. So people said to us, how can you have a program critiquing this? Because the right-wing evangelists and fascists, they're also saying they're opposed to this. But what they're opposed to is women having any kind of liberation. They're in favor of the enforcement of women as breeders of children and as passive, docile figures in society. When we're saying sex work is not agency, it's not empowerment, but it's oppression, we're saying that not from the same standpoint of these fascists that want to, double down on the oppression of women. We're saying that a whole new world is possible without the gender oppression, without this kind of degradation of women, in which sexual relations can be based on equality, respect, and mutual pleasure. That's not, where women have the right to abortion. Right? That's not the agenda of the fascists. So you can't sort of, set your compass points based on the fascists are saying something similar to that. They're saying something, if you analyze the content, utterly different, right? So we have to say what's true and fight for it and help people make those distinctions between what the fascists are going after when they use woke as a punching bag, right? And what we're talking about with woke lunacy, which is something entirely different and which has to do with helping people to break with these shackles that keep them chained to the system. This is the whole sort of gist and thrust of this indictment, that this woke lunacy, this mode of thinking, just reinforces the thinking of this system. And, you know, Rafa got into it deeply in his talk. So those are the 2 points I wanted to make. One, how harmful this is, even taking your point about empathy and how the woke police are deciding who can express empathy in the realm of art. And then, again, being able to have the analytical ability to distinguish between what these fascists are saying and what is actually true. That's a challenge. So when we go on the campuses, you know, we have to sort of take this apart. And that's what has to be done right now.
And it's actually a real necessity, because the fact that the fascists are the only ones critiquing woke right now is a huge problem, you know. And these two things are reinforced. They're clashing, the fascism and the woke lunacy. They're clashing, but they're also reinforcing each other. You know, I was saying they have every day you turn on Fox News and they're mocking and ridiculing this woke shit. You know, they have libs of TikTok, and they just go on TikTok and grab all the like craziest shit and then like mock it, and then they use that to then go after, you know, all kinds of legitimate struggles against racial oppression. I'm pretty sure DeSantis used the Stop Woke Act to go after AP African American Studies, if I'm not mistaken. You know, so they're using that to go after like everything, right? So but it's convenient for them because there is actually some loony ass shit going on, you know. And then on the other hand, the more that this woke shit has the mantle of the only thing that supposedly is standing up against fascism and standing up against racism and gender oppression, which is, I mean, that's how it presents itself on the college campuses today. If you're conscious, if you're woke in the sense of aware of injustice, well, this is the framework that exists for you. That's a problem, you know. So we're fighting to put something different on the map right now, which fundamentally we're trying to put revolution on the map. But this woke shit is a huge obstacle. Yeah, go ahead.
I think this the comment that Raymond made about the fascist wasn't lunacy. What did you say? Fascist insanity versus woke lunacy is this tension about where should people stand in society. When I went to college in the 90s, I remember I did my liberal arts class, and the big thing was jihad versus McWorld, and that the tension in the 90s were where were people going to as a global society, where were people going to stand? Were you going to go with jihad, or were we going to go for McWorld? And like that, these were the only two options in our society. The thing about, the sentiment that you had, I think about the knee-jerk response around woke as what my knee-jerk response is too, that I don't necessarily like the anti-woke part of it. But the other thing too is that when you were talking, I live in Philadelphia, there was a Harriet Tubman sculpture that was made by this white guy. And there was all these bids. But there was I don't know what happened with all the bids, but this white guy got this bid to make this sculpture, and it was revoked because people were upset that it wasn't someone who was of African American descent or African descent. The problem with the things that you're saying is that we live in a world where some people have way more access to being able to make art, that people had access to do these things. And so there's a little bit of a grain of truth of why is it that some people have access to things and get these bids and other people don't. And so that's where the only thing that that I have a knee-jerk response to, then I'm like, well, there's a grain of truth. If you go into I live in Philadelphia where the city is basically almost 50% white, 50% black, and there's like Latino and some Asian communities. But all my nonprofits I've ever worked in, everybody's white in leadership. there is that truth of that who has access to things and who gets credibility. And so there is a part of this woke culture that's talking about looking at the racism, the homophobia and the sexism that does exist. But I like this idea of these two competing ideas. Like, what kind of world do you really want? The people who disagree with what you're putting on here, I would say, do you want a revolutionary society or do you not? But then also, too, we need to figure out how to bring forward people who are not yet ready to say they want revolution. It's clear that the two of you are up here, and you understand clearly for why we need an emancipating society, not just for Americans, but for all of people. But for many people, breaking out of that framework is a challenge because that is not ever what we've ever lived under. Everything is about me, 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 me. And so how do we have these parallel tracks, which I appreciated on here, is out of the love for humanity and the planet, out of the profound respect for truth and science, and out of a necessary, I can't even read my being old, revolutionary determination for the emancipation of all of humanity, we will defend and debate the following in public squares. So there is a part of unity that, look at, if there's a grain of truth for what you're saying, okay, but do you want revolutionary emancipation, or do you want to be non-marginalized anymore? And so I'm trying to figure out how do we go about and going forward with these people and bringing them forward between 0 and 100 to actually want revolution, and that's what I feel like is a hard thing.
There's a lot in what you said, but I was even going to say there's a lot in what you said, but I just want to, we're not going to go on too much longer, so I just want to get a sense of, are there other hands, other people who want to speak?
Yeah. I just also want people to know that some of us are going down to a conference in Philadelphia, the American Sociology Association. This is starting on Thursday night. We'll be there at least Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And we're going to be taking this woke lunacy versus real revolution to that conference, right? Letting people know about this initiative and asking professors and students to sign Rafael up, to set up programs, and we're going to open up the debate there. So I want people to know before anyone leaves that if you would like to join us going down there, get in touch with me and Rafi before you leave. Okay? Some of you may already have plans to be there, but we're going to be there. Okay? Just
yeah. And I want to say, look, there's to what you were raising. There's no question that people who've been locked out of being able to have access to the world of literature and art and sculpture, or whatever sphere it is, people who have been locked out, or the nonprofit world, that should be changed. Like, people should be, we have to actually go out there, we have to oppose every form of discrimination. But that's very different from the quote I said at the end of my speech about I'm not going to read dead white males anymore, or I'm not going to, have, or the cancellation of books like the one Raymond was talking about, a good book that's building empathy for our immigrant brothers and sisters who have to go on this perilous journey. Canceling a book like that so that you can, because you think the book deal should have been for you, this is extremely harmful, and it is, honestly, it is just a reflection of this dog-eat-dog capitalist mentality, and you're using your identity as leverage to get more for you, and it's all within a very narrow sphere, and fuck the masses of people. And this is where I wanted to come back to what you were raising, man, about when is this situation, when are people going to actually wake up? I forgot exactly how you put it. When's the dam going to break? Yeah, basically. We have to pull people out of that dog-eat-dog rat race, and get people to look at the big picture. What is happening in the world that we're facing right now? The hottest July in the hottest month in 120,000 years. Actually, I don't know if people know this, but I think it was the Paris Climate Agreement said the threshold for catastrophic climate consequences is basically 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And in July, it actually went up to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. I think it's probably going to go back down to 1.2 degrees Celsius, but then it's going to keep climbing. You know, this is the state of we are actually in unprecedented times. You know, Biden even said that the danger of nuclear Armageddon, his words, is greater than it's been since the Cuban Missile Crisis, when John F. Kennedy said the danger of nuclear war was nearly 50%. Think about that. People have no fucking idea what nuclear war means. We're just past the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki when the U.S. wiped out 2 whole cities. But these days, with Russia, the United States, China, the amount of nuclear weapons they have, they could destroy the entire planet.
80 times more powerful.
They could destroy the entire planet. This is, and Biden is saying we're closer to that possibility than we've been during the Cuban. I mean, people need to wake the fuck up about what is happening and stop scrambling and scuffling for a tiny little piece of the pie. You know, that's and you know, we could talk about the indictment of Donald Trump, which is very much, you know, people shouldn't just sit here and cheer about that indictment. This is gonna escalate the clash within society. And these fascists are talking about, you know, what's her name, Carrie Lake, that fascist from Arizona or wherever she's from. She said if they want to go through Trump, if they want to get to Trump, they're going to have to go through 75 million Americans, and we believe in our Second Amendment right, you know? So, yeah, the NRA, you know? So we need to wake people up to the reality. But the other aspect of that, just in terms of your question of when's the dam going to break, all of this is shaking people. You know, it's forcing people to question fundamental things about this society. And it's even more so as the reality of this situation continues and escalates and further intrudes into people's daily lives. It's not making people revolutionary spontaneously. It's actually causing a lot of people to get even more depressed. Suicide rates are at all-time highs. To get even you know, a lot of people are getting even more oblivious, turning away from reality, just indulging in self. But people, the norms, the norms that people have been conditioned to accept about the society are being battered. You know, peaceful transfer of power from Republicans to Democrats, Democrats to Republicans. This has been going on for hundreds of years. You know, this is all being undermined by Trump and these fascists who think they're the only legitimate political force. You know, relying on the legal system to deal with grievances. You know, that's now the whole legal system is dominated by a fascist majority on the Supreme Court. You know, all this is the basis right now to win people over to revolution. It doesn't mean it's going to... This is exactly why we have to go and frontally challenge people. We have to bring people real revolution. We have to put it on the map. We're on a campaign right now. I just came from Los Angeles where we just had a whole weekend of plastering the city with posters, you know, about revolution. We're bringing people this Bob Avakian interview because there is no revolution without leadership, and this is not just any leader, but this is someone who's got a whole new framework for emancipation, you know, and you really get that in a living way in that interview. You know, we're connecting people with the Revolution Nothing Less show and this website because people, as these events unfold, people need analysis. They need analysis every day, analysis every week. What's happening? Why is it happening? Where are the interests of humanity? So we need to plug people into all this, growing numbers of people. And this is the challenge for everyone here. You know, we are headed somewhere very terrible. But the same conditions that are leading things to such a terrible place are also the same conditions that could lead people to come into this revolution, but only if we fight for it, only if we bring revolution, and only if we take on these obstacles in the thinking of people, especially this woke lunacy. And the reason being because it's exactly among the people who care. You know, it's among the people who want to do something. It's not just the oblivious individualists who don't give a fuck about anyone but themselves. It's the people who care and want to do something. And then they get brought into this cannibalistic fucking shit where they're targeting each other and don't even have a right to speak or do anything.
I think we should. Do you want to end that? Yeah. I think we should. It's 10 after 9. I mean, Jim, you want to make a brief comment? I
just wanted to say a couple of things.
Hold on, if you the mic. Yeah, I'm going to do that.
The passion that both of you displayed is very inspiring, but I think we need tools. And I'm going to tell you just a couple of very simple tools that may not seem making the revolution today, but can lead people to challenge how they're being betrayed with the mass psychology and seduction of woke lunacy. How many of you have seen a form that you have to fill out that doesn't ask you what your birth sex is? It now asks you what your gender is. It asks you what your gender is. What do? Well, I write in what my birth sex is, and I ask them what time of day is it, and where am I, and who am I with, because that dictates my gender expression. Gender expression has been erased from the language. It's gender identity, which is very limited and not fluid and not expressive about humans actually act in life. So it's those little questions that you begin to tear away. Joy Reid talks about you were assigned your gender at birth. You're not assigned your gender at birth. Gender is a product of nurture. It's not assigned. You're assigned your birth sex. This is how the woke lunacy, think about why is that done. If anyone wants, I can tell you why I think it's done. I'm not going to do it now. But it's these simple little things that I try to engage people in the context of what is this system doing for you? If you're a billionaire, we know what it's doing for the billionaire. But what is it doing for the people in this room? What is the people out on the street here? And really ask them, what is this system doing for you? Yeah. That opens the conversation to the revolution that we're all trying to talk about. Thank you.
All right. So we're gonna end the formal part of the program now, but I want to encourage everyone to stay behind and let's talk informally and carry the discussion forward if that's what people want to do. And also, if there are any people here that want to get involved in this initiative, the woke lunacy versus real revolution. By the way, we didn't make this explicit. We are going to open it up here in New York in the fall. We want to try to have a program at Columbia University and maybe some other places, New School, NYU. We want to do it here in New York in the fall. So if there are people here that would like to, it's a national tour. But we want to, have a real focus here in New York, and in the East Coast. So again, if people want to be part of this, learn more about it, get on the mailing list, talk with Rafa, okay? And then our friend here was asking about, how we're looking at, building this revolution. That's obviously, we can talk more about it. But I want to encourage everyone here to look at this proclamation. We are the RevComs, Revolutionary Communists. We are working for a real revolution and a whole new emancipating way to live. And this, in a very concentrated way, kind of sets forth, in connection and in response to your question about how is this revolution going to get traction. This speaks to how, we're going out, how we're going about this, right? And how, it's very, very, very much related, to some of the questions people have put on the floor about how people are thinking and where their thinking is at, and what Rafa was saying about big changes that are taking place in the world. And there is this rare time when revolution becomes more possible, even though it's not so clear on the surface, but it is in fact the case because of all the divisions and all the heightened contradictions of the system, which have been spoken to in part tonight. This proclamation can help people get a sense of what is the strategy, that is guiding the RevComs in putting Rev on the map, accumulating the forces for revolution, and getting into the position so that when we can really do the dog in Babylon, when we can really lead tens of millions of people to rise up in revolution, that is what the preparation has been for, to bring about a whole new world. So take a look at this, and we're going to end the program now. Again, ask people to stay behind to talk more, and consider making a contribution if you haven't already to the tour, to the store, and be back soon. That's it.